I sure do love working on multiple video projects at one time, unable to get a single one done because I'm stressing out about the other ones that I'm doing at the exact same time. Instead of working on any of those video projects, maybe I should waste time by reading something. How about Homestuck? Truly a story made to be viewed through the mechanisms of a papery hardback. That's the best way to do things. Man, it feels like it's been such a long time since I first read Homestuck. How long has it been, anyway?
Oh no.
Oh no! Oh no! So, the day is finally upon us. As of the posting of this video, Homestuck first began on mspaintadventures.com 10 whopping years ago. It's a little bit insane to consider. It's been an entire decade since we were first introduced to the world of John Egbert, the Trolls, Buckets, and strange cosplay groups. Homestuck took from 2009 to 2016 to even be completed, approximately 7 years between, both beginning and ending on April the 13th, 413 becoming a recurring number within the comic story. Despite having several video projects I'm working on at the moment, I decided to put everything on the back burner for just a moment to get a video whipped up for this year's anniversary, because a decade milestone is a decade milestone, and having just finished rereading Homestuck recently, I feel I'd be remiss not to collect my thoughts on this odd internet epic on today, the day of its 10th year on this planet. So, without a moment to spare, get on your Zodiac shirts, paint your skin gray, put some candy corn on your head, and let me tell you about Homestuck. I promise I won't be that obnoxious about it though, it's okay, you can come back. As I commonly do at the beginning of these types of videos, let me offer a brief history lesson, one of which for this topic in particular I think will prove to be extremely prudent. Homestuck is a webcomic written, illustrated, and sometimes animated by American author and artist Andrew Hussie, and is the fourth overall webcomic published on his self-hosted website MS Paint Adventures, later rebranded to Homestuck.com after a publishing rights acquisition with American anime and manga publishing company Viz Media. The comic centers around a group of teenagers who unwittingly bring about the end of the world through the installation of a beta copy of an upcoming video game called Spurb, the ultimate goal of which is to create an entirely new and inhabitable universe. The comic is made up mostly of static images and GIF panels, which proceed one by one with varying lengths of text below them, sometimes encompassing simple narration, sometimes lengthy journal or instant message logs between characters. Sometimes the comic delves into full-fledged Adobe Flash animations, which include music, and sometimes these Flash pages can even be interactive walk-around games that require the reader to interact with them to obtain relevant story information. Homestuck is extremely well known for being both complicated and incredibly long, clocking in at a total of 8,123 pages. The early days of Homestuck cemented its strange hybridized style by molding its story progression around the concept of a choose-your-own-adventure style video game. The story advanced via fan contribution, with fans submitting actions that the characters could take in order to proceed through the story. As Andrew Hussie himself puts it, you'll find this method generates quite the garden path through a story, leading to a good deal of meandering, silly diversions, gags, trial and error from the player, and impromptu story crafting decisions. I'm playing the role of a dungeon master, a game engine responding to input, and an improv comic all in one. Of course, many plot points of Homestuck's overarching narrative was planned well in advance, and by the time the fandom had significantly grown as early as 2010, Hussie moved away from the fan input style because it had grown, quote, too unwieldy to tell a coherent story. While Andrew now controlled the main plot and characters' actions, he still visited fan blogs and forums to piece together small ideas to add into the comic's narrative. Although the majority of the comic was posted serially, with pages irregularly added over the course of each day, Hussie decided in 2013 to add the final acts in one update. He named the time period he was taking away to finish the story the Gigapause. Various large pauses happened since then, with the Gigapause lasting from October 16th, 2013 to October 16th, 2014. The comic paused again on January 19, 2015, lasting until April 13th of the same year. The final hiatus was from August 12th of 2015 to March 28th, 2016, which was coined the Omega Pause. On April 13th, 2016, exactly 7 years after Homestuck began, Andrew released the final chapter, a 9-minute-long animated short titled S Act 7, with plans for an epilogue still slated for an undetermined point in the future. On October 25th, 2016, the comic updated with a credits sequence and several panels taking place after the events of Act 7 in the form of a Snapchat story. So, what exactly about Homestuck's unwieldy, complicated long-form narrative drew in so many fans, so many cosplayers, fan artists, and more? What sold the charm? What kept them reading? What even is Homestuck? Well, to explain that question, let's start from the beginning. Homestuck begins when a 13-year-old boy named John Egbert receives a beta copy of an upcoming video game called Spurb in the mail. Upon installing and running the game on his computer, a storm of meteors begin to hail down on his house in real life, which he survives only by managing to transport himself to a planet in another dimension known as the Inciposphere. John's friends, the snarky and well-read Rose Lalonde, the sword-loving cool guy Dave Strider, and the animal-obsessed Jade Harley all join him in the game as they all learn they have unwittingly triggered the destruction of the Earth, and it is their duty to play the game in order to create a new universe. As they begin exploring this strange new world, John and his friends are harassed by a group of 12 internet trolls, a species of aliens with gray skin and candy corn-colored horns who have played a version of the game prior to them. As the trolls gradually become more important to the story, the narrative shifts to a side arc exploring the nature of their society and the specific sequence of events that led to the trolls' victory in their game session, which led to the creation of the humans' universe. As the focus shifts back to the human heroes, the two species begin cooperating to salvage the kids' doomed game session after they accidentally give rise to an unbeatable enemy within the game called Jack Noir. They learn of a game mechanism known as a scratch, with which they can hard reboot their session, creating a reset version of their universe in which their places have been swapped with that of their ancestors. Upon scratching the game, a new version of Earth is created in which John's grandmother, Jane Crocker, who died before the story's beginning, is a 15-year-old and the protagonist of the new arc. She leads a team with her 3 friends Roxy Lalonde, Dirk Strider, and Jake English, the respective mother, brother, and grandfather of Rose, Dave, and Jade, through their own session of the game, while the original humans and surviving trolls journey to the new session over the course of 3 years, having escaped their dimensions prior to the scratch's completion. Upon uniting in the new session, the kids and trolls enact a plan to finally create a new universe and defeat Lord English, a supposedly invincible time-traveling demon who threatens all of reality and set a lot of the problems in Homestuck in place. Their plan is opposed by the Conquest, the former villainous empress of the trolls, now in English's servitude, as well as the still dangerous Jack Noir, who also escaped from the originally doomed session. Matters further complicate as John develops new abilities which allow him to retcon previous events within the story's narrative. The plan fails, and with only John, Roxy, and Terezi left standing, John goes back to retcon key mistakes in the narrative under Terezi's guidance. In the retconned narrative, the kids and trolls are able to defeat the Conquest and Jack, and successfully create a new universe, with the defeat of Lord English by an army of ghosts in the furthest ring implied, but left largely to speculation. The basic premise of the comic has been said to be inspired by games like The Sims, Spore, and Earthbound. The adventure's narrative is heavily characterized by elements of time travel, mystery, a complex fictional universe, and frequent overt references to pop culture and previous adventures. The comic also heavily draws inspiration from aspects of contemporary society, such as online gaming and internet culture. In addition to the main bulk of the comic's content, a significant load of merchandise and side projects have arisen from the brand as well, including t-shirts, hoodies, pins, books, and fan art prints. Fans were also recruited into producing music for the webcomic, many tracks of which were featured in actual Flash animations, and all of which were released in 10 major soundtrack albums as well as 18 side albums on the series' official Bandcamp page. An anthology spin-off webcomic called Paradox.Space was launched on the 5th anniversary of Homestuck, where guest artists explored the universe and characters in non-canon side material, and a full-fledged video game based within the comic's universe called Hiveswap was funded within 32 hours on Kickstarter, eventually raising a total of $2,485,506, with the first episodic release dropping on September 14, 2017. The actual comic proper encompasses a wide variety of genres, which I think adds to its overall wide appeal, including action-adventure, apocalyptic, comedy-drama, coming-of-age, and science fantasy. Above all, though, it's important to remember that Homestuck's overall story serves to be something of a modern creation myth. A creation myth, for those of you not in the know, is a symbolic narrative that serves to be an explanation of how the world began and how people first came to inhabit it. While popular usage of the term myth often refers to false or fictional stories, various cultures ascribe varying degrees of truth to their creation myths. Of course, this doesn't really apply to Homestuck, considering we all know Homestuck didn't actually happen. Or did it? But nevertheless, Homestuck does encompass most of the fundamental building blocks of the creation myth's narrative. The creation myth often describes the ordering of the cosmos from a state of chaos or amorphousness, with characters who are either deities, human-like figures, or animals who speak and transform easily. They're also set in dim and non-specific periods of time prior to our modern era, addressing questions deeply meaningful to the society that circulates them, revealing their central worldviews, the framework for self-identity of their culture, and the individual in a universal context. Of creation myths, David A. Leeming once wrote, "Creation myths tell us how things began. All cultures have creation myths. There are primary myths, the first stage in what might be called the psychic life of the species. As cultures, we identify ourselves through the collective dreams we call creation myths or cosmogonies. Creation myths explain, in metaphorical terms, our sense of who we are in the context of the world, and in doing so they reveal our real priorities, as well as our real prejudices. Our images of creation say a great deal about who we are." In a fundamental sense, where Homestuck begins to deviate from most creation myths, however, is in that it describes a universe conceptually after our own. The universe which is ultimately created as a result of Homestuck's narrative is not ours, but rather a universe created after our own. In this sense, while carrying the core concepts of a creation myth, Homestuck gets to carry our modern sensibilities, understandings, and pop cultural influences into the realm of the creation myth, to weave a story similar and yet dissimilar to the creation myths we're already familiar with. In this sense, too, it makes sense that Homestuck becomes almost a weirdly sprawling amalgamate of cross-media storytelling, as it takes various aspects of different forms of storytelling we're familiar with and cram them into a single-purpose narrative. After all, video games, chat logs, and flash animations didn't exist in the age of many holy texts, but they do now, and most people are at least tangentially familiar with them. In this sense, would it not be prudent to, in some manner, represent them in a modern creation myth? But okay, maybe we're getting a little in over our heads here. Let's take a step back and evaluate the format of Homestuck and how its unique innovations to the world of comics and online creator-driven content in general have shaped the landscape of cross-media in new and interesting ways. The first and most obvious to talk about, as it is pervasive throughout the entirety of the comic, is the adventure game format most of the story seems to take. In a sense, though most of the format is performative, in that it's not an actual game directed by a player, it imitates the conventions of games in order to strike an immediate chord with people familiar with these types of games. An internet audience in particular is fairly likely to have encountered these similar types of games in the past as well, which makes the connection all the more immediately striking and identifiable. In this way as well, the story dances with the concepts of meta-narrative quite often, frequently taking time aside to lambast or joke about itself and its own audience, as well as to provide diversions and deconstructions of reader expectation based both upon its own format and the nature of the game structure the story within the comic often tends to project itself into, with things like loading screen fakeouts, sudden narrative jumps to the projected chagrin of the reading audience, and actual literal glitches in the story, both in terms of disruption of the actual story's universe and a conceptual loading error within a metaphorical game cartridge or disc. Come on. Stupid piece of crap. This sort of towing, or even sometimes outright removal of the fourth wall between Homestuck's narrative and its readership often opens it up to further and more tangible interactions from its fanbase, and most other stories wouldn't tend to offer that, which is, of course, what leads to many impassioned fans rising to participate with it. This, of course, extends very brazenly to the inclusion of flash animations within the comic story, which offer music and animation to illustrate dramatic plot points within the story, many of which have accrued innumerable reaction videos on YouTube and other such platforms. Famously, the finale flash of Act 5, titled S-Cascade, was first hosted on the internet flash animation website Newgrounds in an attempt to prepare for the amount of traffic the animation would receive. On release day, there was so much traffic to the video that it crashed the entirety of Newgrounds temporarily, crashing the MSPA site as well, and then it was posted to Mega Upload. which led to that entire site going down intermittently too. Various Flash walkaround games also exist within the narrative, which play more like small interactive sections of story, serving to further immerse readers in the game metaphor by allowing them, if briefly, direct action over obtaining portions of the narrative and information related to it. John, in this actual video game I'm playing, Character Man, walk through that... Why can't you do the It's on my TV. Mordecai Node of Tor Books suggested that Homestuck has to be discussed separately between what it is as a webcomic and what its plot actually entails, comparing it to hypertext fiction and the genre's attempted use in physical books like Pale Fire and House of Leaves. Node concluded that Homestuck, quote, is the first great work of genuinely hypertext fiction. If that puts it in the same breath as Ulysses, then so be it. The comparison between Homestuck and Ulysses, a famous modernist novel by Irish writer James Joyce, is not all that an uncommon one either. PBS's Idea channel compared the two due to the webcomic's overall length and general complexity, posing that the effort put forward by people who finish Homestuck, similarly to people who finish Ulysses, is an example of effort justification. Effort justification being an idea hailing from the realm of social psychology, stemming from Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance, which states that a person's tendency to attribute a value to an outcome is greater when they have to put more effort into it. The greater the effort put in, the greater the objective value of the outcome, which is why if you climb a tall mountain, you need to brag to all your friends on Facebook about it. Or if you finish reading Homestuck, you have to brag to all your friends who know what the hell a Homestuck is. Ultimately though, beyond all of the formatting marvels, the creation myth structures, the metafiction and hypertext dives, the cross-media hybridization, the in-universe memes, the fourth wall shattering, and walls of text, what exactly connects about Homestuck? What makes its narrative and characters not only interesting, but also relatable and engaging to its readership? As put by Andrew Hussey himself, the way the story worked was, I set up some basics and a few initial conditions. Readers gave feedback, I updated the story very rapidly in response, and it just goes where it goes. There were measures of planning and design, but it was largely improvisational and fluid, a sort of creative conversation with the story's readership. The narrative was shaped in response to these factors, and so were the characters. So characters, just like the story, are really just initial profiles that are meant to be pliable, shaped over time in surprising ways. I'm not sure it makes sense for me to say any character went in surprising directions, since that was the point. There were no character arcs mapped out fully before page 1, which could serve as the basis for surprising departures. As a coming-of-age story, the kids grow and evolve as everything else develops along the way. Kids can turn out to be anything. The prolonged, chaotic narrative gives them sort of an extended environment in which to discover who they are, which I think leads to some relatable experiences for a lot of people. The very narrative universe of Homestuck is one Hussey has stated he views as analogous to life itself. The game and even the narrative itself they exist in is a hostile, confining medium. Life messes with you. It can feel like an antagonistic, nihilistic continuum, broken in ways actively sabotaging you and others, yet appears to have demands of you, hoops to jump through, comparable to the rules of a sadistic game or the structure of a stunted narrative. I think life can feel this way, especially to young people figuring things out. So in that way, the game/narrative doesn't feel structured conventionally, so much as it comes across as a dysfunctional, actively hostile, encompassing reality that a bunch of fictional kids are stuck in for a long time, while they confront the truth about themselves. It shifts most of the focus on character, less on the usual beats of story. They respond to these pressures similarly to how young people growing up respond to the pressures of life, which for the most part is a disastrously messy process. This feels to me why it resonated with a lot of younger readers. While creation myth and coming of age are core components to the universe of Homestuck, the characters and their hazardous journey through life are what craft the heart at Homestuck Center. And with all of this in mind, I'd like to pose a personal theory as to what I think the ultimate point of Homestuck's narrative really boils down to. Homestuck is a story about teenagers poised to create a new universe after triggering the destruction of the one they previously inhabited. Throughout the story, they are posed with multiple conflicts arising from death, destruction, violence, and heartbreak. Many offshoot or doomed timelines are created in which their goals are not achieved, their players fail, their friends die, and the ghosts left behind are no longer in control of the narrative. They do not belong to the alpha timeline, and they do not reach a satisfied narrative conclusion. In a sense, these offshoot kids, these doomed versions of themselves, are a reflection of how Homestuck treats its character growth in the first place. In essence, they represent how these characters are not necessarily built to have conventional story arcs. They're built to develop like people do, making a cavalcade of mistakes, reaching gruesome conclusions after taking one too many a wrong turn, and no glamour or fanfare being in sight to save them. Again, as stated by Hussey, Homestuck is supposedly a story that is also a game. In games, the characters die all the time. How many times did you let Mario fall in the pit before he saved the princess? Who weeps for these Marios? In games, your characters die, but you keep trying and rebooting and resetting until finally, they make it. When you play a game, this process is all very impersonal. Once you finally win, when all is said and done, those deaths didn't count. Only the linear path of the final victorious version of the character is considered real. Mario never actually died, did he? Except the omniscient player knows better. Homestuck seems to combine all the meaningless deaths of a trial-and-error game journey with the way death is treated dramatically in other media, where, unlike our oblivious Mario, the characters are aware and afraid of the many deaths they must experience before finally winning the game. And what of Homestuck's looming antagonist, the Lord over all time, the violent, crazed, and megalomaniacal demon known as Lord English? What of him? What of his origins as a cherub named Caliborn and his twin Calliope? Where do they fit into this narrative picture? Well, my friends, I see it like this. Homestuck is a story that, in its essence, reflects the statement, the journey is more important than the destination, which is also to say that everything ultimately comes to an end. A story, a game, a person, a universe, everything is finite, nothing is forever, and all things will eventually reach a conclusion. Not very often are endings glamorous, reflective of the ends we write into storybooks with satisfying reach-arounds, arcs, and victories. Sometimes the end comes when we least expect it, when we least desire it, with no grace, no fanfare, and most of the time they wind up being frightfully uneventful, unmistakably clumsy, or just downright unintentional. A sentiment that recurs multiple times throughout Homestuck's narrative is the idea that believing in something, even if it's patently false or untrue, is bound to make said thing slightly more believable or real by some small margin. This can be seen through more esoteric examples like Tavros's imaginary friend Rufio, a reflection of his own self-esteem, which he later finds out is the actual name of his ancestor, or more direct examples like the cherub's juju items, which are objects said to have no clear beginning or end, that exist in a universe seemingly by pure force of will, items such as the twin suckers or the haunting puppet Little Cal. In essence, the protagonists of Homestuck achieve many victories they think to be unlikely, unfeasible, or even downright impossible by a similar force of will, a drive to continue searching for a solution in the midst of a hopeless situation. The dedication to the stance that if we work together, if we just try hard enough, we can make a miracle, we can solve this problem, we can do something to make this work. A majority of the story is spent dabbling over the particulars of an alpha timeline, where causality dictates the course of time, and where any timeline that diverts from the purpose of perpetuating the universe, paradox space's existence in and of itself, this timeline inevitably branches away from that of the alpha timeline and becomes doomed. However, around the point of the story where John receives his retcon powers from Lord English's hidden juju, the alpha timeline itself is actively disrupted and doomed by Arania Surcat, which throws the entire future into turmoil. This leads to John going back to retcon key events which ultimately lead to the ending, and the kid's goals being fulfilled. Because he steps outside the barriers of causality, the alpha timeline and the very concept of the canon itself to mold and shape the outcome to their favor. In a sense, he's taken the idea of every tragic ending, every somber acceptance of death, and every heartbreak, and not only let it count for something, but through sheer force of will, redirected all of these circumstances in favor of our heroes. If you've ever heard sentiments spun of everything having an end, you've also surely heard of every ending also marking a new beginning, too. And this is mirrored in no small part through the big bad antagonist, Lord English himself. Lord English is the alias of a cherub named Caliborn. Within the universe of Homestuck, cherubs are born with two dueling personalities within one body, which swap between sleep cycles. One is born with aggressive antagonistic traits, while the other is more recessive in kind. Both cherubs, during their maturation, vie for dominance over their host body, with the stronger of the two eventually winning out and becoming the permanent host, while the other twin dies. Caliborn went through a similar process with his twin Calliope and ultimately won out over her. after which Caliborn entered his own session of the game, mastered his aspect as a Lord of Time, slayed his boss monster called a Denizen, and acquired a magical item he used to seal away the only prospective challengers who could hope to defeat him, who were implied to be the 4 main protagonists at some point in the future. The item, however, is said to only be usable by him once, and the next time it's used, it's destined to be used against him. Fearing its capabilities, Caliborn locks it away in the far reaches of Paradox-Space in the furthest ring, a place unaffected by the regular flow of time, and which is accessible via dream bubbles both to ghosts of the deceased and to the dreaming selves of people whose respective dream self from the game has died. After using his powers to cheat the game, Caliborn becomes a master of time as well as unconditionally immortal, taking on the moniker of Lord English and proceeding to spread disaster, destruction, mayhem, and suffering throughout any and all timelines and dimensions he could find his way into. What begins to become his apparent downfall, however, is what he continues to search for throughout space during all of that time. Remember how Homestuck has a lot to do with timelines, specifically branching ones based on certain outcomes or decisions? Well, that comes into play here. You see, logically, considering that Caliborn domineered over Calliope during his maturation, there must exist a timeline where the opposite occurred and Calliope domineered, correct? Correct. This timeline's Calliope, however, was met with a fruitless game session and ultimately led to her demise. She did, however, become very powerful in her own right before death and sealed herself away in a dream bubble deep within the reaches of the furthest ring. The reason Lord English wreaks havoc across space is simple. He's looking for this version of Calliope, hoping to destroy her before she can compromise his immortality. When the losing version of Calliope finds her alternate self in the furthest ring, she has no grand task to perform, no grand purpose to fulfill. The only tasks she exists to serve is to lead the other herself to the Green Sun, which provides its power to the game's first Guardians, a power which itself partly fuels Lord English. With the destruction of the Green Sun, Lord English is left open to attack. The losing Calliope is resurrected by Roxy and told by her other self to live. And presumably, the juju Caliborn had hidden away so long ago is used by Vriska to summon the future kids, who defeat him once and for all. In the meantime, the post-retcon kids and trolls vanquish their remaining enemies, win the game, and create a universe. Everything seems to wrap up nicely. And this, I think, is where the core conceit of Homestuck's narrative begins to shine through. The kids, accepting of a world with endings but hopeful for a new world of new beginnings, value their journey over their destination, refuse to accept the nihilistic, sober defeats of a bad hand, and overtake destiny simply by believing in their ability to do so with enough power. In stark contrast, Lord English, who is unconditionally immortal and nigh indestructible, spends his entire immortal life searching in vain for one person who could bring about his own end, and in the process ends up neglecting the very people who bring about his ultimate defeat by not taking them with enough stock to see them for the threat they were. Lord English hasn't accepted his end, hasn't accepted a world of endings and new beginnings, and therefore brings about his own end by remaining trapped and characterized by his past. He doesn't have any substantive journey to live for, and instead focuses only on the end he desperately attempts and fails to outrun. And what use is there trying to outrun the end when it's already here? Of course, not every journey is without its flaws, and with a story as long as Homestuck, there's bound to be several. The story's characterization at times places an uncomfortable amount of correlation between neurodivergency and villainy, particularly in the case of Gamzee, which could be read as somewhat stereotypical and a harmful caricature of people with mental health issues. There are also a fair few amount of strange and unnecessary gendered aspects, such as troll girls having boobs, despite being basically bugs, and the cherub dynamics between antagonistic and recessive traits being somewhat stilted in the style of archaic gender roles. There also are a lot of really cringy humor bits that could be seen as downright insensitive to disabled people, some creepy humor revolving around sexual innuendo in the direction of characters who are nowhere close to adults, and a lot of really poor writing decisions revolving, again, around Gamzee in general. There's also an abundance of minor slur usage, particularly the R-word, but I'm a little more forgiving of this particular example, specifically because the story does revolve around a lot of immature teenagers learning to be less immature. Overall, looking back on Homestuck 10 years later, it has its ups, it certainly has its downs, But one thing that remains abundantly clear about the work as a whole is that it's a breathtakingly innovative, charmingly hilarious, allegorically dense, and emotionally blistering farce of modern fiction, and you'd be damned mistaken not to at least give it a shot. It's not for everyone, by a long shot, don't get me wrong, but if you haven't tried it yet, you might just want to. In closing, I'd like to wrap up with one more quote from author Andrew Hussey. Is Homestuck? Yes. Yes, it is.
When you see a nice girl and you don't know what to say, you missed your chance, now she probably thinks you're gay. Is there any wonder that your thunder might not work? She had the hots for you, now she just thinks you're a jerk. I'm torn between two fragile lines. Hey there, you look nice. Or, hey there, would you like to talk about Homestuck? Please don't walk away from me. I'm not that kind of guy, you see. Hey there, would you like to talk about Homestuck?
Hi there, everybody. I made a video about Homestuck, I guess. Sorry the Mireiniki video wasn't the first one to come out. I have still been working on that, by the way. Don't worry. I haven't forgotten about that. It's just taking a lot longer than I thought it would because, surprise, surprise, it's hard to write notes about something that you actually kind of hate. So, there you go. Real quick, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the members of Trollian.Space for offering criticisms of Homestuck that I could levy against it to make this review a bit more balanced and, fair in favor of presenting good things and bad things about Homestuck. I thought their input was very valuable. Thank you to everybody who contributed to that. And also, I wanted to give a shout out to Heartcade, who drew the little troll Sona picture of myself that is included in the thumbnail of this video, which I thought was really cute, and I wanted to include in the thumbnail because I liked it a lot. Lastly, I just want to get the regular spiel out of the way. You can read Homestuck from Viz Media and their hardback books, or you can read it on Homestuck.com. You can play Hive Swap on Steam, and there's other releases, I think, on like Itch.io or something, or whatever, I don't know. If you want to support the future creation of my videos, I always have my Patreon open for such things, and you can get tier rewards and other such goodies. I'd like to say a special thank you to my patrons, Dean Wise and Gigs, for making all of this possible. Thank you for giving me your dollars, your hard-earned dollars, which I do not deserve. You can find me on Tumblr at NezumiVA. You can find me at other places, which I'm sure I'll be sure to include over the thing because I'm forgetting words. I'll just put all the stuff that I usually put there on the screen right now. You're gonna be seeing it. It's gonna be there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I am very tired. Take easy and enjoy your 413.